With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, will a new EPA final rule unfairly target farmers? We will look into it in today's interview segment. But to start today, I'm in Washington, D.C. at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting's annual Washington Watch, where on Monday we had the opportunity to connect with representatives from a number of organizations, one of which was the United Soybean Board, and that's where I talked with Mac Marshall.
Hey, good afternoon, Sabrina. My name is Mac Marshall, and I'm the Vice President of Market Intelligence for the United Soybean Board.
All right, so a lot of the areas where I report, and where I'm from, in fact, I'm from California, and I report in California, also Arizona, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, and Indiana. Now, some of those areas have soybeans, but a lot of those areas are not big in soybeans. However, from a consumer standpoint, I know that soybeans are involved in our lives in a lot more ways than we think about. Can you tell me what you're doing out here today as we're in Washington, D.C.?
So I love it when I meet new people, and I tell them I work in soy, and they say, I love edamame. And I'm like, I love edamame too. And I say, I bet you really like those chicken wings you're having too. They say, yeah. I was like, well, that's our number one customer in volume, is chickens in the United States. So if you like chickens, you kind of like soy too, because that's what they're fed. But that's not the only ways in which soy shows up in consumer markets. You mentioned you're originally from California. California is, 15% of the passenger vehicle market. We're seeing a tremendous push by the state of California to decarbonize its economy, and through the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, it's effectively set up this environment where now there's so much more demand to produce renewable diesel fuel, which is a drop-in replacement for diesel. Now, why is that great? Well, if you're producing it from soybean oil, you're using a renewable energy source, something that rather from being extracted from the ground is harvested from the ground and then planted next year. And, it's got this virtuous cycle to it. Okay, that's what's happening from a sustainability front, on farm. That's great. Well, what about when you're actually burning that petroleum diesel versus renewable diesel? Well, renewable diesel, it's cleaner burning. You can see a side-by-side of these two fuels burning together. And one of the benefits of having a cleaner burning fuel is that it burns cleaner. There's less particulate matter. There's a great study that is put out by Trinity Consultants. I know Clean Fuels Alliance America, which is a group that we work with, they've studied these health impacts of, and impacts on, local and urban communities of using cleaner burning fuels from products like soybean oil. That, for me as a consumer, if I'm concerned about air quality, that's something that affects all of us. I don't care where we are in the value chain or where we are in the country. If we can get cleaner air, that's fantastic. And soy playing a role in cleaning the air, even better. Okay, great. I've talked transportation, I've talked food. Well, let's talk other things. Let's talk shoes. We have soy-based Skechers, which were created through a partnership with Goodyear. So we've got Goodyear tires using soy. We have DeWalt bar and chain oil using soybean oil. We have firefighting foam, which doesn't have the PFAS chemicals in it. We have cosmetics. I was supposed to bring some soy-based straws today, but I spaced on that. Otherwise, I'd hand you one. And they biodegrade, I believe, in 90 days. And all of these things are how soy can be an efficient and more sustainable and I think just cleaner solution for a lot of the items that we see every day in our lives. There's actually a great video that I'd like to direct your listeners to that we have on UnitedSoybean.org. It's on our US Soy and USB YouTube channels as well. It's called Soy is All Around Us. All right, and we've got two videos of this that I love. One is shot in Times Square in New York City, full 360 panoramic, and you can see just little mouse overs of everything in that shot that can be made from soy. And to maybe bring it a little bit closer to the consumer, we have the same thing in a kitchen. It goes around and you can see everything in the kitchen that can conceivably be made from soy. Many of those products are already on the market now. Everything from paint, vinyl adhesives, coatings. It's exciting.
Now tell me one more time, where can our listeners find those videos?
So the United Soybean Board YouTube channel, also the US Soy YouTube channel, and yeah, we're We have, sites on, I think, all the major socials, Instagram, Facebook, and, of course, UnitedSoybean.org.
Thank you so much for your time.
This was a real pleasure, Sabrina.
You are listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Here's Chuck Zimmerman.
I'm visiting with Janice Person, and Janice, you just had a big announcement that here at the Agri-Marketing Conference with your grounded communications. So first of all, just tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, we just created a nice new kind of ag onboarding program. So the idea is, you and I both know, having worked in the world of agriculture, we hire people into agencies and companies based on our needs. And sometimes the need is digital advertising or tech or whatever, and they may not always have a farm background. So what could we do to help companies compress that time before you go from knowing nothing about ag to being in client meetings and things where you don't really know what to say, you don't really understand the concepts in the room? How can we help you guys build that initial knowledge of agriculture? And so we've got 10 hours up there now in different programs. A lot of it is Ag 101, so the basics of getting to know farmers and the mindset of farmers and what really drives behavior in terms of how much our communities matter to us in agriculture that may be different from urban. We talk through the business perspective of what are the markets, how do they work, what's the deal with cash flow, because most of us in America get a paycheck every couple of weeks. Farmers don't always have that option. And then we get into sustainability, and then people start choosing their own path. Do you want to go to crops? Do you want to go to livestock? What do you want to do?
Do you have an example you could give of a real-time customer that you've worked with?
Yeah, actually we had somebody just give me some feedback on it already. And it's somebody that works in dairy, and wow, in all capitals, and was thinking like how nice it was to be able to understand all of sustainability at once, right? So sometimes you'll talk about soil, sometimes you'll talk about water, sometimes you'll talk about climate, sometimes it's pollinators or animals and wildlife, and we really think in agriculture you have to remember people have to thrive at the same time. And so we have a panel of experts that talk through all those pieces, and it kind of weaves it all together with people like Debbie Lyons-Blythe, who's on the Sustainable Roundtable for Beef, and some of those kind of folks, that really makes it easy to understand, so then you can go to the next level in other conversations.
Yeah, she's a great example, and you've got a pretty full slate of people that are your experts that can help you with this.
Right. We're, Chuck, you and I have both been in this industry a long time. We know a lot of people, right? So as I started doing it, I was able to go for experts and have them talk about what they know. I was helping them adjust to understanding the basics, right? Instead of talking at the expert level, let's get to the basics. And it's been fantastic. We've had experts from farms, from universities, and probably the most recognizable is Temple Grandin, talking about animal handling. But we have 40-something experts and 700 years of experience in ag represented by those folks. So it's not just a one-person kind of thing, and that was really important to me. I knew what I needed to know when I came into the business, but we've had a group of advisors kind of working with us throughout the last 9 months, helping us understand what holes they see in new employees and all those kind of pieces. It's really a full approach.
How about from location? Is this limited to a certain geography, or how far would you go?
So we've really focused on U.S. agriculture, but we have participation from the West Coast, from the East Coast, North and South, right? And we're going to continue developing that. So we have phase 1 is out there now, and we had 30-something states involved, experts from 30-something states. And now we're going to go into doing more depth, and we're already planning how can we get to some of those other states and some other experts.
What does somebody have to do in order to get involved?
Well, one of the easy things to do is if they follow you guys on AgWired, y'all send out the press release, and there's a free preview for the lesson there. They can go in and check it out and see if it really is the kind of thing that would work for them. We're also, if you go to groundedinag.com contact, we're also doing some like Zoom sessions where we'll walk people through different things so they can see it's not only video, but we have like handouts that go with lessons. We have quizzes built in. And then because I think the real value is when you pair what we've collected with what people in your office know. We've even done discussion kind of prompts, not guides, because you can't figure out all the different possibilities, but a prompt on how to do. Maybe you should talk about our crop consultants important to you, right? Like they're important to some parts of business in agriculture, not others. And just to be able to understand they're out there, if you ever get into the cotton business or a vegetable business, it's going to be more important for you.
Well, when they are looking for a cotton expert, you might be their expert, right?
I've done a few lessons. I didn't do a lot of lessons, but I've done a few, and I worked in the pesticide business and stuff like that too, crop protection. So there's been a few of them I've done, but Bob Walker's also a really big expert, and so he's done some for us, and Hardwick's down in Louisiana. So I like to think I'm an expert, but I know other people have different expertise and different experience, and so I want to rely on them.
Anything else you'd like folks to know that we haven't touched?
No, I just check it out. It's groundedinag.com. You'll see a lot. We've got video there that shows you some of those components. And that idea of if you have somebody new to agriculture in your business, this is a way to invest a little bit in them and help them gain that experience so you don't face that issue where they're with a client or a customer and they're not understanding things, or they say something wrong, or they prepare slides with the wrong kind of corn, because to them corn is sweet corn and to us corn is yellow deck corn. So that kind of thing.
All right, well, thank you very much, Janice, and congratulations on this big announcement. And this is just a great place to do it here at the Agri Marketing Conference. I'm Chuck Zimmerman reporting.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. With a preview of what you'll be hearing today on AgNet West, here's Farm News Director Brian German.
Cover crops can offer growers a variety of different benefits. Vice President of Matoyan Brothers LLC, Richard Matoyan, said they've been working through an NRCS incentive program to establish cover crops in their pistachio orchards. He noted their thought process behind the practice and what they're hoping to achieve.
One would be increased soil health with the organic matter that we're going to have. Second, I've now got flowering plants in there. That is a pollinator for the remaining bees, so I can provide a habitat for the pollinators. And then third, for us, it's weed suppression. So I'm not going to mow it all the way down to the ground. I'm going to keep it a few inches up. So my hope and my belief is that I'm going to suppress other weeds that potentially could be growing through the spring and summertime.
The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and the U.S. Department of Agriculture have formed a new committee to advise on ag trade policies. The Seasonal and Perishable Agricultural Products Advisory Committee aims to enhance competitiveness through administrative actions and legislation. USTR seeks qualified applicants for a 4-year term, appointing up to 25 members jointly with the Secretary of Agriculture. Members must specialize in areas such as producing and selling perishable goods, understanding market dynamics, and proposing actionable recommendations. Representation from various sectors and demographics is encouraged, and members serve without compensation and must maintain eligibility for a security clearance. Members will serve a term of up to 4 years or until the committee is set to expire, and will serve as representatives or subject matter experts subject to conflict of interest rules. A new report from the Fertilizer Institute highlights the sustainability improvements in the industry. TFI's released data showcasing advancements across workforce safety, energy, environment, fertilizer use, and innovation. TFI's data collected since 2013 reflects operations in 2022, highlighting efforts to improve safety, sustainability, and efficiency. Key findings include 25 zero-discharge facilities, outperforming industry benchmarks in safety, and U.S. farmers achieving a 70% nitrogen use efficiency, surpassing the global average. TFI members are actively pursuing decarbonization strategies such as energy efficiency enhancements and low-carbon ammonia technologies. These initiatives aim to increase fertilizer sustainability while maintaining agricultural productivity. The report underscores the industry's commitment to sustainable practices and ongoing efforts to minimize environmental impact. The USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service in California is accepting applications for 2 programs to help support bird species. The Migratory Bird Resurgence Initiative, authorized by the 2018 Farm Bill, aims to preserve and improve habitat for migratory bird species through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. In California, MBRI utilizes NRCS conservation practices to address habitat concerns. As an extension of a 2019 NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program agreement, the Tricolored Blackbird Initiative focuses on managing silage fields to support nesting of tricolored blackbirds. Each initiative offers $500,000 statewide for agricultural producers. Eligible operations in specific counties can apply for either initiative by contacting their local NRCS Service Center by May 24th. In the coming weeks, UC Agriculture and Natural Resources will be hosting an agronomic crops and irrigation water management workshop. The event's scheduled to begin at 8 in the morning on May 15th at the Barbara Worth Country Club in Holtville. Cooperative Extension Specialist in Climate Adaptation and Agriculture, Tapan Pathak, will begin the workshop with a presentation on the challenges due to climate change and tools and resources to manage risks in agriculture. That will be followed by information on cooperative extension irrigation and water management research in recent years and an update on the Colorado River water situation. Following the break, other topics of discussion will include enhancing Sudan grass hay production and quality, spider mites and low desert alfalfa, and an update on the improved alfalfa varieties for a water-challenged future. More information about the workshop is available on the upcoming events page at agnetwest.com. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
The Texas Ag Commissioner is thanking the nation for sending help. That's coming up on This Land of Ours. As Texas continues recovering from the devastating fires in the Panhandle, the Texas Agriculture Department thanks their valued counterparts in other state ag departments around the nation. They say departments in states like Alabama, Iowa, and South Carolina have provided unwavering support and resources, which have been an example of solidarity and compassion. Texas Ag Commissioner Sid Miller says, quote, "The outpouring of support from our fellow state agriculture leaders has been moving during this tough time." He said he'd like to give a Texas-sized thank you to his fellow states for having their backs. For example, the Alabama Ag Department delivered 27 loads of hay, totaling 546 round bales in the Texas Panhandle. The South Carolina Ag Department and in-state partners donated 12 tractor-trailer loads of hay, consisting of 402 bales of hay. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. I am in Washington, D.C. this week at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting's annual Washington Watch, and we are at the Issues Forum today, where I have stopped by the NASA booth, and I am talking with Brad. Brad, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us who you are and what you do, please.
Sure. My name is Brad Dorn. I'm the Agriculture Program Manager at NASA. Okay, so we focus on Earth observations, looking at Earth and how we can better support the ag industry and ag producers.
I have been fascinated by NASA getting more involved, and I'm not sure I want to say more involved with agriculture, maybe more visually involved in agriculture, that we're learning more about all the ways that NASA supports our agricultural producers and everything going on here on Earth from up there in the sky. So how does that happen?
You know, we've been doing it for a while. Prior to my stint at NASA, I worked at USDA for the Foreign Ag Service, and so we were using the satellite data to support the WASDE reports. What's happened now, though, is both the demand side, people have more need out there. Decisions are more complicated. There's a lot of information out there. Sometimes we don't know if it's good or bad. And our capabilities are getting a lot better. And so what we realize is that we really need to reach out to the ag industry, because we need to understand really truly what are the requirements, what are the needs, what are the pressing needs out there. We don't need to be chasing things. There's way too many important things we need to be doing. And so having these discussions and outreach and getting that feedback, which is the most important thing, on what we should be doing is vital to our program, because otherwise we'll sort of spin around and do stuff, and we don't know whether it's of value or not.
So what kind of feedback have you gotten?
A lot of the feedback is one, stop telling us we're going into a drought. We support the U.S. Drought Monitor, have since its beginning. Tell us when we're coming out of a drought. Tell us when we're going to go into a drought. So that forecasting prediction component, and I know NOAA's working on the in-season forecasts, and we're right along with them, supporting NOAA and the weather forecasts on how we can produce better predictive capabilities, and much of that comes through better observations of what's going on now. That's the only way you're going to get to those better predictions. And so the other thing we're hearing a lot about is water. Water availability, water need. Can we get better information on how I can help manage irrigation management district? Maybe in North Dakota, one of the issues is, okay, we're getting a lot of snowpack. Is that going to turn into our regular flooding, or is that going to get all absorbed down into the earth? So we need to understand the soil moisture better. So that's a bit of a prediction there on what the water availability is going to be in the spring. And I know in South Dakota and North Dakota has that constant problem of, oh my goodness, we're going to be too wet, and then 3 months later we'll be in drought, right? So can we do a better job? We can't affect the weather patterns, but can we give tools that allow producers to make better decisions on what their risk is, what the possibilities are?
Let's talk about that data and getting that data to producers, which is extremely important. How is NASA working on that, and what do you do?
Well, it's a big challenge of ours because we're built like a space agency, not like an agriculture agency, and so we need to utilize our land-grant universities, key tools of ours, both for our research and also for the extension, the getting out to the users and working with them. I mentioned NOAA. They're a major partner. We build the NOAA satellites. We have a whole program just dedicated to weather and how we can better produce better weather information forecasts. Our upcoming sensors are going to be, next generation types of atmospheric and precipitation monitoring systems that eventually, what we want is NOAA to pick those up. USDA, obviously, are a key partner of ours. So we're actually working with them right now on how can we support the climate smart partnerships. There's a role for observations in there. And so we're working with them now on what that role might be, how do they want the data. So it all depends. It could be through industry, say, big industry like a John Deere or General Mills, or it could be more and more so in what we're working with right now, like through the commodity associations. They have the ear of the producer. What are they hearing? How could we help and support the commodity associations to reach out to their producers, get that feedback on what data is valuable or needed?
One of the papers that you have here on our booth that are, of course, the listeners can't see, but I can, and it says from satellites to seeds. And that brings to mind for me just the resources that NASA has available. And being able to pull these resources together and use them for agricultural purposes, what can that mean for agriculture?
Oh, it has been huge, and it continues to be huge. We're seeing more and more satellites go up there. Your producers are seeing those, but the trouble is a lot of those satellites, drones, those technologies don't have the rigor that the NASA satellites have, so that we can be a baseline, we can be that gold standard. The other thing that does is allows us to, if you do something in North Dakota, is it really the same in South Dakota? And so now we can do that with our satellites, then you can do that assessment. The other issue that we have is, especially with weather and some of the events that we're seeing, is it's a global system. The water cycle is a global system. We can't just look at North Dakota and say, okay, yeah, we got you all covered, North Dakota, no problem. We need to know what's going on in Canada. We need to know about those smoke events in Canada to help understand that. And so having the global observations that are always on, assessing what I like to call it the MRI of our planet. We need that MRI to understand really what's changing and how we can produce better, especially predictive information for our producers.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Brad. Again, we were with Brad Dorn with NASA. We are here at Washington Watch in Washington, D.C. with the National Association of Farm Broadcasting. Thank you again, Brad, for taking some time with us. I appreciate it. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. For today's featured interview, I'm talking with Courtney Briggs, Senior Director of Government Affairs at the American Farm Bureau Federation, about the EPA's final rule on PFAS. Could you start out by just explaining to our listeners what this rule is?
Sure. So this rule is part of the Environmental Protection Agency's regulatory roadmap on dealing with PFAS. And just to be clear, so your listeners understand, PFAS is a chemical. We call them forever chemicals because they do not break down naturally in the environment. And they are used in everyday products. Anything that is waterproof, stain-proof, grease-proof. It is in Teflon pans. It's in your Gore-Tex jackets. It is in a variety of everyday products. And the concern has been over the last several decades that exposure to PFAS is leading to some negative health outcomes. So the federal government is now taking steps to regulate PFAS chemicals in their uses. And this was really the first step on EPA's regulatory roadmap. And it is to designate PFOA and PFOS, which are the two most commonly used PFAS chemicals. PFAS chemicals are a class of chemicals. There are hundreds of them. But PFOA and PFOS are the two most commonly used ones. And the federal government is now regulating those chemicals as hazardous materials under CERCLA. And I'm sure a number of your listeners have heard of the CERCLA law, but it is essentially the Superfund law. And it assigns liability to those who produce and use these chemicals. And obviously, I want to be very clear at the onset that farmers do not produce or use PFAS chemicals anywhere in their operations. But what we're seeing happen is because these chemicals do not break down naturally in the environment, and the chemical bonds of these chemicals are so tightly woven that they are finding their way to water supplies, and they are naturally finding their way to farm fields. However, I should caveat that with one of the areas where we are seeing PFAS chemicals end up on farm fields is through the use of biosolids. A farmer will go to their local water utility and take that sewage sludge that is nutrient dense and land apply it as fertilizer. And this has been a celebrated activity by all levels of government. For farmers to do this. It's permitted. Unfortunately, there are areas of the country where we are seeing biosolids contributing to PFAS levels on farm fields.
So I want to make the point again that you made and very clearly made too. And it's just so important that people understand this. I think that this is not a chemical caused by farming or chemicals, I should say, a group of chemicals caused by farming or used in farming. And yet this new rule could have an effect on farmers, right?
Absolutely. So it is worth repeating a number of times. Farmers do not use these chemicals. Nowhere in our operations do we use PFAS chemicals. They are just naturally, finding its way through the environment to farm fields in certain areas of the country. Now, this rulemaking, the CERCLA law, is a joint and several liability statute. So that means that anyone who comes into contact with the chemical can be held liable. So certainly, the chemical manufacturers, the 3Ms and the Chemours of the world are the producers. Then you have Vortex and others that are the users of the chemicals. And then you have us, and we are called passive receivers. Once again, we don't use it. It passively comes to us. And unfortunately, under this rulemaking, just the way that the law is written, anyone who comes into contact, whether it's intentional or not, can be held liable. And that is why we are so concerned about this rule.
So what happens if it is found on a farmer's land?
Yeah, so at this point, I should have started this conversation with saying that the federal government is building this plane as they're flying it. So there are a lot of components that they just have not figured out yet. There's technology that still needs to come online. There are standards that need to be set. But a farmer would be forced at this point, if they had a contaminated farm field, they would potentially be held liable and have to pay for the cleanup and remediation of the farm field. But I want to be clear, Sabrina, that right now, when you go ask the federal government, well, how do you remediate a farm field? What exactly goes into that? What kind of techniques should be used in order to clean up a farm field? They don't have the answers to that yet. They don't have the answers to things like how do you destroy and dispose of PFAS chemicals? So there's still a lot of open questions, and that's why the American Farm Bureau Federation was very vocal in saying that the CERCLA rule is not where we should start. You can't go around assigning liability to people when you haven't even figured out a way of properly cleaning this up. So there's a lot of unanswered questions that remain out there, and they're really important pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, I would think so. When we're looking at such a big issue and there's not a known way, or they haven't figured out a way to actually clean it up yet, but yet they want to start holding people liable. What could be the best outcome from this point? And what are you hoping can happen at this point?
So at this point, AFBF is very vocal on the fact that we need a liability shield for farmers and ranchers in this country. Certainly, there are entities out there that should be held responsible because, PFAS, we do need to clean up a number of areas of the country from PFAS contamination. But the CERCLA rule has always, the theme of the CERCLA rule has always been that the polluter pays. Well, if it's the polluter pay, then it should be the chemical companies that should be on the hook for cleanup and remediation and paying into the Superfund, and they should assume that liability. So we are lobbying Congress to create that liability shield that will protect passive receivers, protect farmers and ranchers from any liability.
I know that you don't really deal in hypotheticals, but I'd like to throw one at you. If we were to look at this in a different way, compared to like an oil spill, let's say, there's an oil spill from a company offshore and cleanup has to happen. Maybe some oil comes up onto the beach and you own a home on the beach and there's, oil there. It's not the homeowner who would be expected to go out and clean. It would be the oil company who had the spill that is expected to carry the burden of cleaning it up. Is that right?
So that is correct. And just to bring it to a more timely disaster, the situation with Norfolk Southern in Ohio, that is a perfect example of how the Superfund law is supposed to work. But the issue that we have with PFAS is that it is ubiquitous. It is absolutely everywhere. If you go looking for it, you will find it, obviously at differing levels. But they have found PFAS chemicals in Antarctica. So I know a lot of people like to try to compare this to dioxins or lead or other chemical issues, but this is on an entirely different level because so many of these PFAS chemicals have been used so prevalently and, really for many decades. The situation that you described is exactly how the Superfund law was designed to work. But unfortunately, we don't have a law on the books that addresses an issue that is as complex as the PFAS situation. I think this administration has decided to take the statute that most closely fits this situation off the bookshelf and apply it here, but it does not fit. And Congress really needs to take a better look at perhaps designing a new law and a new statute to address a situation that is this complicated.
You mentioned, talking to your legislators, elected officials. Is there anything that our listeners can do to get involved in this?
Yes, and I think talking to your elected officials at all levels of government is very important, because I'm just talking about the federal piece, the federal government piece, but there are state governments that are certainly, bringing down laws and regulations that folks need to be aware of. But I think over the last couple of years, we have done a very significant push on educating elected officials and members of Congress about what the impact is going to be on agriculture. I have been up on Capitol Hill and I have highlighted this as a concern, and I've had, prominent members of the United States Senate look at me very confused and say, well, where in your operation do you use PFAS chemicals? So I think having those conversations, expressing the need for that liability carve out for passive receivers, understanding that farmers and ranchers are at this point could be held liable for these things, that is an education effort that needs to be taken on, and we would appreciate your listeners helping that.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like for our listeners to know, or anything that we missed that we should have touched on?
It's worth noting that the agencies did release enforcement discretion policy in conjunction with this rulemaking. It is EPA's best effort to say that they're not going to come after farmers for enforcement actions. So, essentially they said we're going to do our best not to take enforcement actions against farmers and ranchers. That is great, but the problem is that still doesn't protect us from third-party litigation. So this is not an ironclad liability shield that the EPA has offered us. But I did want to mention that there is this enforcement discretion policy that they have released, but it does not give us the protection that we need. It does not allow us to sleep well at night. It just doesn't provide that complete coverage of liability that we need.
Thank you once again to Courtney Briggs, Senior Director of Government Affairs at the American Farm Bureau Federation. That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.